Well, earlier I was able to visit with two gentlemen that know just a little bit about farm life. Mike Spradling is president of Oklahoma's Farm Bureau, and Jack Statz is the state supervisor of agricultural education here in Oklahoma. So, gentlemen, I probably have never seen an issue have probably more passionate responses than this one. I had a reporter come in, that's how I first learned of it, and he said, "You've got to see my Twitter. There's all these messages about child labor laws." And we started looking at it, and this has really upset farm country. Why do you think that is, Mike?
Well, one of the things is certainly not only Oklahoma Farm Bureau, but the American Farm Bureau is really concerned about the DOL, the Department of Labor, interpreting law and starting to propagate law when it really is the responsibility of Congress. Certainly there's safety issues, and we'll address those, I'm sure, as we get through this interview. But the main thing is that we're really concerned about, again, another regulatory agency, such as we've dealt with EPA, but it's really not in their position to be propagating these type of laws. That should be left up to Congress.
Mm-hmm. Now, Jack, you work with, 25,000 students here across the state that are involved in agriculture. From your perspective, what is the issue here?
I think one of the issues that we have the most problem with is to sit there and say that it maybe limits the ability of an agriculture education teacher to supervise and oversee students in an agricultural setting, like in a placement operation, go to work for a farmer, goes to work for somebody in an agriculture enterprise. It limits our ability to supervise them because it says if they don't have a number of safety hours, that they can't even engage in a placement operation in the state of Oklahoma or nationally as we look at it. So we think that that supervisory portion, or that portion of our education that is a hands-on education where we take our classroom and actually apply it or make application to it, we think that that takes that away from us. We think it'd be better for young people. It's always better if we show them the application than to sit there and say, "Hey, don't do that, that's dangerous." We'd rather have somebody sit there, supervisor, and advise those young people. I think that's a better operation.
Hands-on learning.
Yes, sure.
Now, Mike, no one here, none of us will argue that farming can be a dangerous business, correct?
Absolutely. It does have its hazards.
And children do get hurt on the farm. So what do we do to make it safer for children on the farm?
Well, certainly, as in all family farms, a lot of the family farms certainly have children on it. And of course, as you grow up and as you get exposed to hazards, you learn how to deal with them. And that's one of the things that's important, that the children have an opportunity to be not exposed to danger, but to be exposed to agriculture and understand the whole inner workings of agriculture. Secretary Valsack just told the American Farm Bureau Board of Directors earlier this year that within the next 2 decades, we're going to have 100,000 new farmers and ranchers to take the place of the aging and displaced farmers and ranchers now. Where are the next generation going to come from? Young people such as FFA and 4-H have to have an opportunity to experience those things, to develop an interest in it. Agriculture is a learning laboratory. The farms and ranches state of Oklahoma across this nation is a learning laboratory. They learn everything from animal science to horticulture, to just every science there is available, zoology. But they have to have an opportunity to be exposed to that, to learn to develop an interest where they will go on then and choose, come to Oklahoma State University and choose to be involved in production agriculture.
And to give credit where credit is due, I've been to farm safety camps put on by the FFA and both by the Farm Bureau. I mean, your organizations are talking about this.
Absolutely. It's one of these things, I guess, does it come down to compromise? Is there something that the FFA programs, 4-H and Farm Bureaus are going to have to maybe put together a program and maybe go a little further into training or, again, educating children about the hazards? But the best thing that I, as a person, have grown up in agriculture, the experience, hands-on was the best teacher I ever had. But certainly, when we talk about hands-on, we're talking about supervised hands-on. And those are the things with the right personnel there, the right people that have the interest, certainly in the safety of not only children, but anyone working under our supervision, is that we educate them and expose them to those things so they learn how to deal with hazards.
Mm-hmm. Now, I read through the Department of Labor, some of the regulations, and saw some comments by the Secretary of Labor. And her perspective was that, well, why should we treat agriculture different than other industries that we regulate? But I would have to argue that agriculture has a lot more multi-generational farms, which this affects. And it also it's almost naive in the fact that it expects the family farm designation versus the limited liability corporation. And I want one of y'all to explain that to our audience, that most farms today are, or a lot of farms today are limited liability corporations that would fall under this rule.
Absolutely. There are many. Of course, still, the majority of them are straight family farms. And of course, the exemption that says your immediate child is exempt from the rules, but it doesn't exempt your grandchildren, your nieces or nephews, and things that come back during the summer and again help grandma and grandpa on the farm, learning traits of responsibility and self-esteem, and developing an interest in a career that we need people to take interest in, because again, as I mentioned, we're going to be short 100,000 farmers and ranchers in the next 2 decades. They're going to have to come from somewhere, and it'll be the generation now that we deal with, and that the 4-H programs and FFA programs that they train and deal with these young people, they have to have an opportunity, a laboratory to work in to continue to develop that interest that they'll go on and come back into agriculture.
Now, Jack, as I look through all these proposed rules, you know, a lot of them are talking about machinery, PTOs, and all that can be very dangerous, but it also affects dealing with livestock. Talk to me about that.
Well, it's according to how you read the rule and you want to look at the rule, but they talk about anything that inhibits animals, or they talk about controlling animals in a harmful way. For example, if I talked about corralling, if I talked about putting something in a loading chute, if I talked about, could even be dehorning or doing something cosmetically to an animal that would cause their temperament to change, a young person cannot be involved with that. Well, how much limitation do we need to have? Young people are going to have to learn from the time that they grow up how to handle animals, or they need somebody to supervise them, to train them. And plus the other fact, whether we believe it or not, a big portion of young people get involved with agriculture because of their love for animals. And so let's not cut out that their ability to be engaged in agriculture because an animal drew them into our field.
And Jack, I think that points to a real important demographic trend, is that a lot of the members of ag education programs today don't necessarily grow up on the farm.
I know that's kind of a misconception anymore. We think that FFA members, young people involved in agriculture, you know, we think of Oklahoma as basically a lot of times a rural state or an agricultural state, but there's so many of those young people that's not even involved in agriculture, do not grow up on a family farm. If you take the 25,000 FFA members that we have in the state of Oklahoma, there's over 60% of those FFA members that do not grow up on a farm. And you take a young person that is not involved in agriculture, that is a whole new learning process. If a young person was, my argument to them, if you come up and all of a sudden you have a young person that goes out, they're 16 years of age, that has never been around any kind of machinery, I'd think that learning curve and that danger element would just accentuate just immediately.
Well, certainly a number of people agree with you, and we'll certainly be following this issue and report back to everyone about what happens. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.